Hey guys, tonight we're going back. Way back to time when winter didn't just nip at your fingers, it gnawed at your soul. You're standing at the edge of a Scandinavian fjord under a sky the color of old slate in the air. It bites. Not a polite little BRR, but a teeth-rattling, eyelash-freezing, welcome to the ninth circle kind of cold. Snow crunches underfoot like ground glass. Your breath curls up in front of you like smoke, and you're not even inside yet. You probably won't survive this. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And hey, post your location and local time in the comments. I love seeing where and when you're tuning in from. Now dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You push open the heavy, timber-framed door and step inside the longhouse. It's dim in here. A fire pit runs down the middle of the room, its orange light flickering across thick beams blackened by years of smoke. You don't see a chimney because there isn't one. The smoke just rises and slowly seeps out through gaps in the roof, or sometimes not at all. You blink through the haze. Your eyes sting, but your face is grateful for the heat. Longhouses were the winter soul of Viking life. Sturdy, insulated, communal, and built with an extremely practical blend of engineering and let's survive or die trying. The walls are packed with mud and straw. The roof slopes low, thatched tightly, and every square foot of the structure is geared toward one thing, keeping the cold out and the warmth in. You notice the smell. Wood smoke, wool, unwashed bodies, salted meat, animal dung. It's not exactly glade Nordic forest, but it's strangely comforting. Because in here you are not alone. A dozen, maybe 24 people move around you, extended family, workers, a stray friend who came in out of the snow and never left. The longhouse isn't a home in the modern sense. It's more like a human terrarium, warm, foggy, full of life. And you're going to be spending the next 5 months in here. Along the sides of the building are raised wooden platforms covered in furs. This is where people eat, sleep, and argue over who's hoarding the best blanket. Some platforms are built over storage spaces, nice little heat traps. The fire burns in a trench down the middle, sometimes tended by children, sometimes by elders who pretend they're too fragile to haul firewood, but really just like poking flames. You sit near the fire and try not to inhale a full lung of pine smoke. It's warmer here than outside, but not toasty. More like survivably chilly. You'll keep your cloak on, thanks. Historians still argue whether these communal homes were truly cozy or just better than the howling wind outside. One theory says the real heat came from the people themselves. With everyone packed shoulder to shoulder, body heat helped turn the longhouse into a giant living radiator. Of course, that means privacy is non-existent. Someone's always snoring, someone's always whispering gossip, and someone, usually a goat, is chewing on something it shouldn't. Speaking of goats, you hear the shuffle of hooves. Yep, some animals live inside the longhouse too, especially during the deepest winter months. More on that later. For now, you just try not to step in anything organic. A woman is stirring something in a heavy iron pot that smells like fish stew with, possibly turnip. You're not asking questions. Hunger keeps people humble. She passes you a wooden bowl and it burns your fingers through the frost-nipped skin. You slurp it quickly. It's hot, salty, and vaguely slimy. Perfect. The night comes early, really early. In deep winter, parts of Scandinavia get only a few hours of daylight, if that. Imagine the sun rising like it's testing the waters, then saying nah and disappearing again by lunch. That kind of early. So inside the longhouse, time becomes slippery. Is it midnight? Is it 5 p.m.? Is it February yet? The villagers cope with storytelling. An elder starts to speak and everyone leans in. It's a saga you've heard before, a tale of frost giants and gods and longships that sail straight into the sky. But it passes the time and the cadence is hypnotic. You drift a little. Suddenly someone laughs, loudly. The story just took a weird turn involving Thor's missing goat and an ill-timed sneeze. You smile, eyes still closed. The longhouse may not be luxurious, but it works. It holds in heat, shields against the brutal wind, and gives the community a beating, smoky heart. Quirky side note: some Viking longhouses used to have carved dragon head beams on the roof. Not to scare off enemies, those were banned in town, but to ward off spirits and trolls in the wild. Can't hurt. You wrap your cloak tighter. Someone lays an extra fur over your legs. You don't know if it's kindness or them just trying to get closer to the fire. Doesn't matter. You're warm now. And when the wind rattles the outer walls and snow sifts through the eaves, you're still okay. For now. The fire's dying down to a bed of glowing embers, but the longhouse still holds its warmth like a slow exhale. You shift beneath the fur blanket, feeling the weight of it pressed down like a soft, musky bear. Around you, the room has quieted. Only the occasional cough, the crack of a log, or the snort of a nearby sheep breaks the silence. And yet, you're still freezing. Sort of. Because even inside the best-built Viking longhouse, winter doesn't exactly knock politely. It slips through every crack it can find and makes itself comfortable on the edge of your toes. So how do you not freeze solid? You start with furs, of course, layer upon layer. You're wrapped in sheep fleece, maybe even reindeer skin if your host is lucky or rich. Beneath that, rough-spun wool tunics and breeches that itch like mad but trap warmth beautifully. Your cloak. It's heavy, wind-resistant, and probably smells like smoke, sweat, and dog. It also happens to be your sleeping bag. And then there's the fire. Not a fireplace exactly, but that central hearth trench, the slow-burning pulse of the house. It's not just for cooking. It's your furnace, your light source, and your emotional support flame. Viking fires burned almost constantly during winter. Someone's job is to tend them through the night, feeding them logs when they start to sputter. Green wood hisses and pops. Dried peat smolders more slowly, giving a steadier heat, if you can stand the smell. When times were tough, even dried animal dung was pressed into service. You try not to think about that. You scoot closer to the coals where it's warmest. But be careful. Too close and your cloak might smolder. And while you could use a bit more excitement in your evening, spontaneous combustion is not the goal. The real warmth, though, comes from the people. You're not sleeping alone, nobody does. The whole family packs in like herring in a barrel. You're spooning an uncle. A baby is somewhere near your feet. Someone else is snoring so loudly you're pretty sure they're fighting off imaginary trolls. But all that shared body heat, that's gold. Historians still argue whether Vikings intentionally used their group sleeping arrangements as a form of thermal engineering, or if it was simply necessity wrapped in practicality. Either way, it works. Here's a quirky detail. Viking wool garments were often woven incredibly tightly and treated with lanolin-rich grease to repel moisture. So not only did they hold warmth, they were kind of waterproof. You're essentially wearing an early medieval windbreaker made of sheep. Even your footwear pulls its weight. Soft leather boots lined with fur, or, if you're one of the truly cold-averse, insulated with hay or moss. Sound ridiculous? Try standing barefoot on a frozen fjord and see how creative you get. Some even wore foot wrappings stuffed with rabbit fur, tied on with strips of cloth. Cozy, if you don't mind a bit of fluff escaping every time you walk. And then the final layer, each other. You and your fellow longhouse dwellers sleep pressed close, arranged in a way that maximizes warmth and minimizes awkwardness. Except there will be awkwardness. Someone's hand will end up on someone's face. There will be midnight arguments over whose foot just went where, and there is absolutely no such thing as personal space. But in a world where the temperature outside can plummet so low your nostrils stick together, sleeping like a sardine in a smokehouse feels downright luxurious. Still, you can't help wondering, what happens if the fire goes out? What if there's no more dry wood? Well, then you start to ration movement. Vikings would reduce unnecessary trips outside, sit still under layers for hours, and conserve calories wherever possible. Some believe they even intentionally entered a semi-hibernation mode, slowing down, sleeping longer and doing as little as possible during the deepest, darkest weeks. Not exactly your typical New Year's productivity plan. In fact, winter was a time when doing less was doing more. You didn't waste energy unless you had to. You stayed close to the hearth, worked quietly with your hands, and tried not to draw the attention of whatever icy Norse deity was currently ruining the crops. And occasionally, you snuck in a little extra help. It wasn't uncommon for people to sleep with heated stones, pulled from the fire and wrapped in cloth, or even warm ashes, contained in hollowed-out pottery. Of course, the line between cozy warmth and accidental degree burn was a thin one, and you had to be careful. One story tells of a woman who would heat bricks and tuck them beneath her furs, until her brother-in-law, probably for fun, added a little too much heat. Let's just say it was memorable, and not in a good way. As you finally start to drift off, cocooned in skins and surrounded by the comforting smell of wool, smoke, and cabbage, you wonder, what if the fire doesn't go out? What if it's too hot? Spoiler, you just sweat, which means you freeze faster later. And that's the final irony. Staying warm in a Viking longhouse is a balancing act. Too cold and you shiver yourself into sickness. Too hot and you wake up damp and miserable. And yet, most nights they got it right. Not because they had modern technology, not because they cracked the code of heat retention, but because they relied on centuries of trial and error, instinct, and the undeniable magic of sleeping beside someone who smells just as bad as you do. The wind howls outside again, brushing snow against the timber walls like a ghost with icy fingernails. But here, under your fur cloak and next to a snoring cousin, you're safe. You're warm enough. You're Viking enough. You wake to the unmistakable crunch of someone stepping on straw, and not gracefully. A sleepy grunt follows, then a whispered curse in Old Norse. Apparently, someone stubbed their toe on the edge of a bench. Again. Your back stiff, your breath clouds the air, and you're vaguely aware that your leg is partially tangled in a goat. Good morning. But today's lesson isn't about the animals just yet. It's about where you slept. You sit up slowly and look around. All along the sides of the long house, raised platforms line the walls, broad enough to lie down, narrow enough to roll off if you turn suddenly. These platforms are your beds, and what's on top of them is an adventure. At the base, you're lying on straw, hay, moss, or dried leaves, all of which have one thing in common. They used to be alive and now they're pokey. The bedding is meant to keep you off the cold wood and trap a little heat around your body, but it's not exactly memory foam. Every shift you make sends a puff of dried plant material up your nose. You sneeze. Someone groans from across the room. Still, it's better than sleeping directly on the floor. The ground is cold, even inside, and heat rises, or at least tries to. So Vikings built themselves up on these slightly raised platforms, often with rough planked wooden bases, then piled on whatever padding they could find. Sometimes, if you're in a fancier household, you might even get a sack filled with straw or feathers. Soft, right, until you realize the feathers poke, the straw squeaks, and there's something definitely alive crawling near your ankle. And yes, bed bugs were a thing, as were lice. In fact, the Vikings probably didn't call them bed bugs. They probably just called them bugs, or possibly constant companions. Historians still argue whether Viking bedding was regularly cleaned or just shaken out once in a while and layered up for the next season. What we do know is that sleep wasn't a pristine, sanitized ritual. It was functional. You wanted to be warmer than the air, higher than the rats, and far enough from the fire to avoid waking up flambéed. As you swing your legs over the edge of the bedding, your toes hit something cool. A fur pelt, likely from a sheep or dog, laid at the foot of your bed. These were sometimes used for insulation, but also because waking up next to a pelt felt better than waking up next to frozen air. And here's a quirky little tidbit. Some Viking families slept with carved wooden headboards decorated with protective symbols or animal motifs. not for style, but to guard the sleeping soul. They believed that during the night, your spirit could drift away in dreams and needed a kind of spiritual shield to make it back in one piece. So yes, even your bed had backup. Speaking of dreams, sleep wasn't a continuous thing. It came in chunks. Some anthropologists suggest Vikings practiced segmented sleep, waking for an hour or two in the middle of the night, then drifting off again. What did they do during that waking period? Some prayed. Some tended the fire. Others may have whispered stories, planned next season's voyage, or, just sat there, pondering the eternal question of why moss feels like you're sleeping on balding hedgehogs. The smoke lingers overhead. The fire has been fed just enough to stay glowing, and you notice someone slowly peeling back their furs, sitting up with a creaky sigh. Time to fluff the bedding. Not like you're tossing pillows. It's more of a beat the straw senseless kind of action. Smack it around to redistribute the stuffing, shake out the insects, and hope it doesn't collapse in the middle. Beds in the Viking world had to be maintained constantly. Bedding would absorb moisture from breath, body heat, and the general humidity of 30 unwashed humans packed in one timber rectangle. So people aired them out when they could, usually during rare clear winter afternoons when the bedding was dragged outside, flapped around, and then layered back up. But in midwinter, that straw's staying exactly where it is. You're lucky it's dry, and you're luckier you don't have to share your bedding with a third person tonight, like the time you woke up sandwiched between two cousins and a chicken. The bedding also served another purpose: camouflage and protection. Some warriors slept with their weapons under their straw, wrapped in wool. If the longhouse was attacked, or if someone snuck in during the night, at least your sword wouldn't be on the other side of the room. Sure, you might stab yourself in the leg reaching for it half asleep, but hey, you die with honor. You brush some moss off your cloak, kick away a pinecone, where did that come from, and make your way toward the fire trench again. The floor creaks beneath your feet. It's slick in places, muddy from melted snow tracked in by boots and paws. Still, the bedding did its job. You didn't freeze. You're not sick yet, and your back only hurts in 5 places. It could be worse. Some outlying Viking families, especially poorer ones or those farming remote lands, didn't even have proper longhouses. In harsh winters, they bunked in lean-tos or turf-roofed huts, curling up on dirt floors beside cooking fires. Others slept in byres, stone buildings shared with livestock, where warmth and stench were a packaged deal. Compared to that, your straw and fur pile under a timber roof feels downright aristocratic. And besides, after the first few weeks you kind of stop noticing the smell. Maybe. You stretch, yawn, and gather your cloak around your shoulders. The bedding rustles behind you as others start to stir. Another cold day begins. You survive the night. You're only halfway to the fire trench when something soft and oddly moist brushes your ankle. You freeze. There's a bleat. Ah, right, animals. You're sharing your winter home with more than just humans, and some of them have hooves. A goat waddles past you looking entirely unimpressed. It gives you the side-eye as if to say, "You're in my house, actually." Behind it, a chicken hops down from someone's bedding platform like it owns the place. It probably does. Welcome to the Viking winter ecosystem. A swirling mix of family, livestock, and firelight, all jammed into one smoky, timber-framed cylinder of survival. So why are animals here exactly? It's not because the Vikings were particularly fond of cuddling their cows. It's because animals equals warmth. Their body heat, like yours, contributes to the ambient temperature inside the longhouse. One cow might not do much on its own, but add a few goats, some sheep, a pig or two, and maybe a dozen chickens. That's basically a walking radiator with legs. Historians still argue whether Viking livestock were brought inside full-time during winter or only in extreme cold. Some sagas suggest they were rotated in and out, depending on the weather and the household's resources. But in harsher climates, especially northern Scandinavia or Iceland, it wasn't uncommon to keep them in overnight. often in partitioned-off sections of the longhouse or a separate byre connected to the home. You don't get a barn, you get roommates. At first, it's charming. Chickens cluck around your boots. A sheep nestles into a corner like a woolly throw pillow. The pig makes adorable snorting noises in its sleep. Then you step in something. Not so charming anymore. The downside to barnyard cohabitation is, well, the barnyard part. Vikings kept their floors covered in straw or rushes, not because it was fashionable, but because it helped soak up the constant trail of mud, snowmelt, and droppings. Once the floor got too foul, it was swept out, or more likely, layered over with fresh material. Think of it as medieval composting, except you live in the pile. You shuffle over to the fire pit, grateful for warmth, and sit beside a girl sharpening what looks like a massive spoon. You ask if it's for cooking. She shrugs. Could be for soup. Could be for defending the stew from the goat. No one really knows anymore. There's an odd comfort in all this organic chaos. You reach out to scratch behind the ears of a friendly dog who licks your wrist and curls up beside you. Animals in the longhouse weren't just heat sources. They were also early warning systems. If something stirred outside, wolves, strangers, or worse, the animals often reacted first. And yes, people occasionally did sleep with their animals, especially bobbies who might be tucked beside a warm dog or even on a straw bed shared with a lamb or kid goat. It wasn't sentimental, it was survival. You use what you've got, and if what you've got is a furry space heater that also provides milk, you snuggle it. There's a quirky old tale about a Viking farmer who claimed his cow saved his life during the frost of 875. He brought her inside when temperatures dropped below freezing for 3 weeks straight. Every night she lay beside him. Every morning he woke up warm. His neighbors mocked him until most of them lost toes to frostbite. Moral of the story: never underestimate a cow's cuddling potential. Of course, not everyone was thrilled about sharing their living space with livestock. In wealthier settlements, homes might have had divided quarters, with the animals housed in a semi-attached wing, separate but not entirely sealed off. This kept the heat benefits without the surprise puddles. But if you're poor or pragmatic, you just threw some straw down and made peace with it. You stand up and wander toward the back of the house, where a couple of goats are head-butting each other gently in the shadows. One seems to be wearing someone's sock like a hat. No one intervenes. This is just life now. The longhouse breathes around you. Human, animal, wood, smoke. There's a shared rhythm here. You're not at the top of the hierarchy. You're just one warm body among many, participating in the great nightly effort to keep everything alive until spring. And don't think this cohabitation ends at night. During the day, many animals stay inside too, especially during storms or when snowdrifts pile against the door. Venturing outside isn't just uncomfortable, it's dangerous. Predators prowl. Ice is treacherous. And let's not even talk about the wind, which slices through wool like it's trying to turn you into a snow sculpture. You loop back to the fire and pass a woman with a small basket. She's gathering chicken eggs, fresh ones, miraculously unbroken under the hay. One rolls out and nearly hits your foot. She catches it just in time, gives you a look and walks off. Breakfast, apparently. In modern terms, it's easy to picture Viking homes as rustic, romantic, or even adventurous. But the truth is, they were compact ecosystems of survival, where every member of the household, two-legged, four-legged, feathered, or fuzzy, played a role. And as odd as it feels now, you realize it kind of works. You're warm. You're fed. You're in a house full of people who may snore, argue, and occasionally fart loudly near the fire, but who would also trade shifts watching over the hearth, share their extra cloak, or put another log on the fire just so you don't wake up blue. You hear a rustle behind you, then the slow, rhythmic chewing of a sheep who's found someone's mitten. You sigh, shake your head, and smile. Home sweet, livestock-infested home. The fire pops. Someone snores. Somewhere behind you, a chicken is trying to lay an egg in a wooden shoe. It's morning or close enough, but daylight isn't coming anytime soon. This far north in deep winter, the sun's just a rumor. So what do when the nights stretch on for what feels like weeks? You feast. You stretch your arms and rise slowly from your fur cocoon, drawn by the smell of something sizzling. Not burning, sizzling. Your stomach immediately forgets the chill and starts lobbying for breakfast. Feasting during the dead of winter might sound extravagant, but in Viking society, midwinter feasts were essential, not just for calories, but for sanity, morale, and cosmic good standing. The most famous of these was Jol, a pre-Christian festival that gradually became associated with Christmas. And yes, that is where the word Yule comes from. For the Vikings, Jol was about honoring the gods, remembering the dead, and reminding yourself that life hadn't completely ground to a halt. Even in the bitter cold, there was joy to be had, usually fermented. And that's what today is, a feast day. You help stir the pot hanging above the fire. It's bubbling ominously. Someone says it's stew. Someone else winks and says it's last winter's mystery. You pretend you didn't hear that. Around you, the longhouse begins to wake in earnest. People stretch, laugh, argue about who tripped over the pig, and start preparing for the day's gathering. Feasts were communal, even between scattered households. Neighbors would travel, often on skis or sleds, through the snow bearing gifts of dried meat, bread, or strong drink. You might only live 2 miles away, but in snow up to your knees, that's a serious commitment. Feasting wasn't just about food. It was about storytelling, music, games, and ritual. You watch as someone pulls out a carved wooden game board for Hnefatafel, a Viking strategy game that's basically chess meets blood feud. A boy begins retelling a saga, acting out the gods with wild gestures and deliberately terrible impressions. The room warms with more than just fire. At the center of the celebration is food meant to last: smoked fish, dried lamb, lumps of aged cheese, dense barley loaves. Some are soaked in broth to soften them. Some, well, you just chew harder. If you're lucky, there's honey or mead. If you're really lucky, there's fermented shark, a delicacy from Iceland that smells like a biology experiment gone wrong. Someone hands you a chunk, grinning. You take a polite bite and immediately regret every choice that led to this moment. Historians still debate whether fermented shark was eaten regularly or saved for special occasions or dares. But what's clear is that Viking winter diets were designed for survival. High fat, high protein, and low on anything that relied on sunshine or refrigeration. As the feast continues, someone toasts to Thor. Another toasts to a good harvest, despite the fact that everything's currently buried in snow. A third raises their cup to Odin and tells a joke that might involve a bear, a berserker, and a goat in disguise. You're not sure you got the punchline, but everyone's laughing. And suddenly you realize, this isn't just about surviving the cold, it's about surviving the darkness. These feasts stitch together the long nights with heat, light, music, and memory. They reminded you that spring would come, that beyond the smoke-filled walls and snow-choked hills, the sun hadn't actually abandoned you forever. You chew slowly on something unidentifiable but warm, nodding along with the saga. The children start play fighting with wooden swords. The adults start a round of riddles so confusing you're not sure they even have answers. And all the while more food appears. Boiled grains, tough jerky softened with broth, a strange pudding made with dried berries and cream. One woman brings out a bowl of lutefisk, dried fish soaked in lye until it's translucent and vaguely gelatinous. You pause, then pass. Not tonight. There's a quirky theory floating around among scholars that some Viking feasts involved hallucinogenic herbs, possibly slipped into drinks or used in ceremonial rites. While that's not exactly mainstream academic consensus, the idea of entering altered states during the long dark has a certain logic to it. You'd want to escape the frozen monotony somehow, whether through vision quests or just too much mead. Eventually, the feasting slows. People lean back, full and slightly dazed. The room smells like smoke, sweat, stew, and celebration. Someone starts to hum a lullaby, old and soft. The fire crackles louder than the voices now. You find your spot again near the bedding, stretching out with a contented sigh. You're not warm exactly, but you're not cold anymore either. You're full. You're drowsy. You're surrounded by familiar faces and badly behaved livestock. And somewhere in the distance, beyond the darkness, beyond the mountains and the endless white, spring is turning over in its sleep. But tonight you feast and dream and let the warmth hold you one more night. The next morning, though, again, morning is a flexible term in Viking winter. You wake to the distinct gurgle of someone trying to digest too much fermented fish. Around you, groans of mild regret echo through the longhouse. The feast was glorious. The aftermath, slightly less so. Still, there's no time to lie around. You need fuel, real fuel. And not just for warmth. You need energy to stay alive in temperatures that can literally freeze your eyelashes together. This is where the Viking winter diet gets creative. You shuffle toward the fire pit where breakfast is underway. Someone's boiling oats into a thick, gluey porridge that could probably double as mortar. You grab a wooden bowl and accept a ladleful. It's warm. It's bland. It's perfect. The Viking diet in winter wasn't about luxury. It was about calorie density, long shelf life, and the ability to eat something without needing a trip to the outhouse 5 minutes later. You sit on a log bench, blowing steam from your porridge and watching as a boy chews on a stick of dried seal fat like it's Viking chewing gum. Grossed out, don't be. You'll be begging for seal fat in 2 weeks. Historians agree that the core of the Viking diet was meat, fish, dairy, grains, and preserved vegetables, especially in winter when nothing fresh grew. Dried and smoked meats, from lamb to reindeer to wild birds, were staples, often cut into strips and kept for months. Fish was everywhere. Salted cod, smoked herring, and yes, occasionally a whole dried whale chunk if you lived near the right coast. And fat, so much fat. Blubber from seals or even whales was sometimes rendered and stored in clay pots used for cooking or just eaten with a spoon. You might recoil now, but your body, it's thrilled. Fat keeps you warm. It's the Viking version of central heating on the inside. Dairy played a big role too. You watch someone uncork a clay jug of soured goat milk, which smells like betrayal but apparently helps digestion. A bowl of skyr, a thick yogurt-like cheese, is passed around, served with dried berries or honey if you're lucky. You take a bite. It's tangy, rich, and shockingly comforting. And bread, dense, dark, and almost hard enough to qualify as a weapon, makes up the bulk of meals. Vikings ground barley or rye into coarse flour and baked flatbreads on heated stones. During winter, these loaves became chewier, tougher, and often riddled with whatever was available: seeds, nuts, dried herbs, even ground-up tree bark in bad years. You glance at the one in your hand. It crunches, possibly a bit too much. There's a quirky legend from the Orkney Islands about a Viking woman who baked a loaf so hard it cracked a man's tooth, and he married her anyway, declaring, "If her bread can do this, imagine her elbows." Romance was different back then. As you eat, you notice the mead being passed around again. Even in winter mornings, fermented drinks played a part, mostly because clean water wasn't always easy to get, and mead or ale offered a safer and, let's be honest, more enjoyable option. These drinks were low in alcohol by modern standards, more like tangy, fizzy nutrition supplements, with attitude. There's also stock and broth, simmered endlessly over the hearth using bones, roots, and herbs. You sip a ladleful and feel the warmth sink into your ribs. Bone broth wasn't just tasty, it helped with joint pain, a serious issue when your daily commute involves walking through snowdrifts while wearing 25 pounds of wool and goat. Occasionally, someone gets lucky and pulls out a chunk of dried apple or hazelnut from the communal stores. These are treasures, some are preserved in flavor. A single bite is enough to make the whole room pause. But even with all this, winter food wasn't just about what went into your mouth. It was also about ritual, preparation, and sharing. Meals were central to the household rhythm. You helped cook, helped clean, and sometimes even helped grind the flour by hand using a quernstone that might have belonged to your great-great-grandmother. You try it later. It's exhausting. Your arms feel like overcooked fish afterward. Historians still argue whether Viking food was genuinely palatable or just edible enough not to cry. Some sagas describe rich dishes, roasts, pastries, seasoned meats. Others talk about months of chewing salted cod until your jaw goes numb. What's clear, though, is that they made it work. Pickled cabbage, dried peas, soured milk, charred bones for flavor. Anything that could last through the season found its place on the Viking winter table. And you know what? Some of it's actually pretty good. You go back for more of the barley stew, ignoring the way it sticks to your spoon like medieval wallpaper paste. It warms your core. That's what matters. A woman sits beside you and starts peeling something pale and shriveled. It looks like an old finger. She says it's a dried root vegetable, boiled and mashed into a kind of proto-potato mash. You nod politely and pretend not to be terrified. As the meal winds down, people stretch, rinse bowls with snow-packed rags, and settle back into their chores. A few start carving wooden tools. Others twist rope. But everyone's a little warmer, a little fuller, and a lot more awake. Your belly is full, the fire is bright, and for now, just for now, you don't feel like winter is trying to kill you. And that's enough. You step outside. Instant regret. The cold punches you right in the sinuses like an angry frost giant. Your nose tries to fold inward. Your eyes water instantly. Everything that isn't covered starts questioning your life decisions. You scramble back inside. That's when you realize your clothes are doing a lot more work than you gave them credit for. Welcome to the art and science of Viking winter clothing. You peel off your outer layer, steam rising from your shoulders, and take stock. You're wearing a tunic of rough-spun wool that smells faintly like damp sheep and campfire. Beneath that, a linen undershirt that has soaked up a lot more sweat than you thought possible. Your legs are wrapped in thick woolen trousers, baggy at the thighs, tighter toward the ankles, and over those, long leg wraps or winningas, spiral-bound like ancient compression socks. Are they fashionable? No. Do they work? Absolutely. Vikings didn't have synthetic insulation, zippers, or performance fabrics. What they did have was wool, and a lot of it. Wool insulates even when it's wet, and with sheep being practically part of the household furniture, it was one of the most available materials around. Historians agree, layering was key. Instead of one massive winter coat, the Vikings wore multiple overlapping garments that trapped heat and let them shed layers when needed. A waterproofed outer cloak, often made from felted wool or lined with fur, acted as a windbreaker. Some versions even had hoods, which you now realize are less cute accessory and more lifesaver when the wind is screaming at your ears. And shoes, you glance down. You're wearing turn shoes, soft leather footwear, often lined with fur or stuffed with dried grass for insulation. They're surprisingly comfortable, like medieval UGGs, but with more risk of frostbite. You've wrapped the tops tightly with leather straps to keep the snow out. Not that it'll help much in a blizzard. Still, you're warm, mostly. You rummage in a corner and pull out your gloves, wool mittens, stitched from 2 layers and patched more times than you can count. Mittens, not gloves, because fingers like to cuddle for warmth. Individual finger holes, too cold. You pull them on and immediately feel 5% more alive. Here's a quirky detail. Viking hats weren't horned, sorry Halloween industry, but they were essential. Most were conical woolen caps, sometimes trimmed with fur or leather. Some even had ear flaps. You pop one on. Your ears sing with gratitude. There's a man by the fire lacing up his cloak with a decorative metal brooch. It's shaped like a serpent biting its tail. Is it practical? Is it status? Definitely. Viking clothing wasn't just survival gear. It was identity, too. The materials, dyes, and trims you wore said a lot about who you were and how well your last raid went. Rich folks got dyed wool, imported silk trim, and squirrel fur. You've got a stylish ensemble of local sheep, and I found this moss, so I stitched it in. You make it work. Some believe Viking cloaks were fastened off-center, pinned at the shoulder rather than the chest. This left your sword arm free, just in case, someone challenges you to a duel over a fish stew recipe. Historians still argue over whether Vikings used waxed fabric to make garments more water-resistant. Some say they did. Others believe the lanolin in untreated wool did the trick. What's certain is, dry is warm, and once your layers are soaked, it's all downhill from there. You join a few others by the fire, patching a tear in your sleeve. Repairs are constant in winter. Threads unravel, seams weaken, and sometimes you just outgrow your trousers after one too many dried sheep fat breakfasts. Everyone knows how to sew, even the kids. Some even make their own needle cases from bone or antler, carved with runes for luck. There's a quiet pride in mending your clothes. It's not about vanity, it's about resilience. As you finish stitching, someone points out a new arrival at the door, a cousin from a nearby homestead, arriving with a sled pulled by shaggy ponies. His cloak is wrapped tight, his eyelashes frosted white, and his beard is doing an uncanny icicle impression. You open the door and a gust of Arctic wind barges in like a drunk relative. Everyone shouts. Someone throws a sheepskin at it. It doesn't help. You slam the door shut and peel the visitor out of his layers. Underneath the snow-encrusted outer cloak are multiple wool tunics, 2 pairs of leggings, fur-lined boots, and, no joke, a seal bladder pouch tied around his waist, probably filled with something to drink that won't freeze. Smart guy. The longhouse quickly warms him up. Within minutes, his fingers regain color. You hand him a bowl of broth and a dry pair of mittens. He grins. And in that moment, you understand something vital. Viking winter clothing wasn't just about fabric. It was about community. You help dress each other, undress each other, share cloaks, trade socks, and lend someone a scarf when the wind's howling and they've misplaced theirs. No one survives winter solo. You build warmth together, stitch it into every layer, and wrap it around the people you care about. You feel the weight of your own cloak settle around your shoulders as you look out at the snowy dark through the narrow doorway. Tomorrow, you might venture outside. Today, you stay layered, laced, and grateful. You wake up in the middle of the night with a full bladder. Of course you do. Outside, it's probably 15 below freezing, and the wind is whistling through every possible crevice like it's auditioning for a horror movie soundtrack. The fire has burned low, your nose is cold, and every instinct says to just wait until morning. But you can't. So you rise, muttering every Viking-appropriate swear you know, and begin the process of reassembling your outerwear. First your thick woolen socks, then the boots, already stiff with frost. You wrap your winningas back around your calves and lace them tight. Cloak, mittens, hat. You look like a sheep trying to impersonate a burrito. Now comes the question. Where do you go to pee in the middle of a Viking winter? Contrary to romantic Viking movies, they did not have en-suite bathrooms or warm, welcoming outhouses. What they did have, maybe, was a latrine pit located a short, miserable walk away from the longhouse. Some families dug shallow trenches and covered them with planks, while wealthier farms built little wooden outhouses with thatched roofs, essentially a box with a hole in it and a lot of cold regrets. You trudge out, lantern in hand, snow crunching underfoot. The cold is so intense it feels loud. Your breath fogs instantly. The stars overhead blaze with terrifying clarity. You reach the outhouse. It leans slightly. There's a suspicious creaking sound. You open the door and immediately wish you hadn't. The seat is, well, calling it a seat is generous. It's a rough plank with a hole cut in it. Frost sparkles on the wood. Someone carved a rune into the doorframe, probably for warmth. It didn't work. You do your business as quickly as humanly possible and get out before any frostbite considerations come into play. You slip once on the ice outside and land in a very unheroic position. Fortunately, no one sees. Historians still argue whether Vikings had chamber pots indoors during winter. Some claim they did, especially for children and elders. Others insist chamber pots were rare in Scandinavia and that people just braved the cold. There's even some fringe speculation about using clay pots lined with straw, emptied in the morning by the unfortunate youngest household member. You wouldn't mind a chamber pot right now, honestly. Back inside, you warm your hands over the embers and start to think about sanitation in the Viking Age more broadly. It's not glamorous, but in the winter, hygiene becomes a survival issue. You can't just wash your hands with icy river water, unless you want frostbite and hypothermia. Most likely, you wipe with moss or scraps of wool. Some people believe they use snow, which sounds fresh and natural, until you remember it's also numbing and likely full of deer droppings. Viking hygiene gets a bad rap, but honestly, for the time period they were relatively clean. Combs, ear spoons, tweezers, and nail picks were common, often made of bone or metal and tucked into a little kit on your belt. Weekly baths were a thing, often taken in communal bathhouses when possible. The Old Norse word for Saturday, laugardagur, literally means bath day. But winter complicates everything. Bathing becomes rare, hair gets greasy, clothes go unwashed because washing them would mean taking them off. So people just air things out, hang tunics over the rafters, and hope the smoke from the hearth acts as deodorant. It doesn't. And yet there's a system here, a rhythm. You start to notice the morning routine. Someone always rises early to stoke the fire, someone checks the water buckets, someone, usually the teen, hauls snow to melt for cooking or washing. You take your turn melting snow in an iron pot, then pour the water into a wooden wash basin. Everyone washes hands and faces, splashing water onto skin so fast it's almost aggressive. Someone mutters about frost fairies. Someone else throws a wet cloth at you. It's how people bond. There's a curious little item near the basin, a lye soap ball, probably made with animal fat and ash. It smells like the opposite of flowers, but it scrubs surprisingly well. It freezes sometimes, so you chip at it with a knife. Later in the day, you notice an older woman mending a reindeer hide diaper by firelight. Yes, diaper. Viking bobbies didn't magically hibernate in winter. They needed constant attention and creative layering. Reindeer fur was soft, absorbent, and available, so it served as early baby wear. You suddenly feel a new level of respect for Viking parents. You also learn the hard way that refuse doesn't vanish in the snow. The area behind the longhouse becomes a sort of gray zone, snow mixed with ash, bones, scraps, and yes, human waste. Come spring, it'll get cleaned and composted. But for now, you step carefully. Still, you manage. Everyone does. Life in winter isn't clean, but it's functional. You dump the wash basin water outside and watch it steam as it hits the snow. The air smells like pine, peat smoke, and a faint undercurrent of sweat and wool. It's oddly comforting, like everything is alive and determined to keep going. And then, just as you're about to head back in, you hear the faintest noise. A low grunt, a rustle near the animal pen. You freeze. Not literally yet. Was that a fox, a bear, a neighbor trying to steal firewood? You grip the door frame and peer into the dark. Probably nothing, but this is why latrine trips are best taken in pairs, not just for the cold, but for what might be lurking beyond the torchlight. You slip back inside, bolt the door, and press your hands to the warmth of your cloak. Next time, you're definitely bringing a buddy. Sleep comes slowly tonight. Not because of the cold this time, but because of the stillness. The fire's steady crackle fades into a hush, and the breath of the household quiets to soft puffs and the occasional snore. Shadows stretch long against the timber walls, and above you, the beams creak ever so gently, like they're speaking to each other in wood-grain whispers. But you can't help noticing something else. A carved figure, small and smoothed by years of touch, hangs just above the bed where two children sleep. It's a Thor's hammer, Mjolnir, rendered in dark wood and looped onto a cord. And over the doorway, tucked into the thatch, there's a little bundle of bones and red thread, barely visible unless you're looking for it. You didn't notice those during the day. And now, as the wind picks up again, you start to wonder who, or what, they were meant to keep away. Vikings, for all their practicality, were deeply spiritual people. The coldest nights of the year weren't just dangerous because of frostbite or wolves. They were dangerous because of what might visit in the dark. You're not alone in the longhouse. Besides the humans and animals, there's a sense of presence. Not malevolent exactly, but watchful. You lie still and listen. The rafters groan. A baby murmurs in its sleep. Somewhere behind you, someone whispers something in Old Norse, then goes quiet again. Welcome to the season of spirits. Midwinter, especially around Yule, was believed to be a time when the boundary between the living and the dead was thin. It was the darkest stretch of the year, after all, the sun barely scraping the horizon for a few hours a day, if at all. So, the Vikings filled the gloom with rituals, symbols, and protections. You feel it in the way people behave. They don't whistle after sunset. They avoid saying the names of certain dead relatives aloud. Children are told not to wander near the forest edge. It's not just for safety, it's because they might be seen. You remember the hammer pendant over the children's bed. That's more than a piece of jewelry, it's a protective charm. Thor, god of thunder and strength, was often invoked to protect homes from both physical and spiritual threats. People wore his hammer to bed, carved it into their furniture, even baked it into bread loaves for luck. But Thor wasn't the only one watching. There's also the Disir, female ancestral spirits who watched over families, sometimes kindly, sometimes sternly. You might dream of one standing beside the fire, or wake up to find a cup tipped over without reason. Historians still argue whether the Disir were truly worshipped or merely feared. But either way, no Viking would sleep through Yule without offering them something, a scrap of meat, a piece of bread, or even a whispered prayer. More curious still are the night walkers, spirits or beings believed to wander during the longest nights. The most notorious, the Draugr. Now, zombie would be a crude modern term, but you get the idea. The Draugr were said to be restless dead, often former warriors or greedy men, who refused to stay in their graves. In the stories, they rose from their burial mounds during the deepest nights to haunt the living, smashing doors, suffocating sleepers, or just sitting on someone's chest and breathing heavily like a horrifying sleep paralysis therapist. Of course, you're told it's just superstition. But people here hammer iron nails into doorposts, just in case. They smear ashes in a protective circle around bobbies. They burn juniper on the hearth before bed, not because it smells nice, it doesn't, but because it drives off the Hulju the hidden folk, who might otherwise steal a child or twist your dreams into something sharp. And then there are the dreams themselves. Vikings believed that dreams could carry messages, not just from the gods, but from people long dead. You've already overheard one woman talking about her grandmother's warning in a dream: don't light a candle after the third rooster crows. No one knows what that means, but no one's risking it either. You close your eyes and try to sleep, but now your imagination is wandering. Did the longhouse always creak like that? Is that the goat shifting, or something heavier? And then something strange happens. You start to hum, not consciously, more like an echo of something you heard during the day. A soft, almost tuneless lullaby, maybe Icelandic, maybe older. One of the older women sang it to herself while sewing. Now it loops gently in your mind as if it belongs to the walls. And oddly, it helps. Because not all spirits are frightening. Some are protective. Grandfathers who come back to check the door latch. mothers who stroke your hair through a dream, lost children who just want to warm their hands near the fire. You finally begin to drift, and just before sleep fully pulls you under, you remember one last detail. When you first arrived, a small bundle had been tucked into your furs. You thought it was just stuffing, maybe dried herbs to keep the lice away. But now you wonder if it was a charm. Maybe someone wanted you to be protected tonight, too. The fire's been burning low for a while now. You roll over, the edge of your woolen blanket slipping just enough to let the cold nip at your ankles, and for a moment you wonder, who's making sure the fire doesn't go out? Because in this world, fire isn't a cozy luxury, it's life support. You blink sleepily toward the hearth. It's still glowing, red and poolsing like a buried ember heart. And someone's moving near it, quiet, careful, but deliberate. Turns out, not everyone gets to sleep through the night. There's a rhythm to the Viking household in winter, and someone's always on the night shift. Tonight, it's an older man, gray-bearded and wrapped in a heavy cloak that looks like it hasn't been cleaned since the last raid. He's poking the coals, adding a few sticks at just the right angle, muttering to himself. Not a conversation, more like a ritual. You realize now, this is the fire tender, and his job might be the most important one here. Every Viking longhouse had someone, sometimes chosen by rotation, sometimes a role of pride, who took responsibility for tending the fire during the night. If the hearth dies, the temperature plummets, food spoils, and everyone wakes up in the kind of cold that bites your lungs when you breathe. But it's not just about firewood and kindling. You watch him feed the flames, but also place a small carved stone just off to the side. You don't recognize it. It looks old, older than the longhouse itself. It could be just a weight to keep something in place, or something else. Historians still argue whether some Viking fire practices were religious or just habit, but it's clear that for this man, fire tending is equal parts skill, superstition, and sacred duty. And now that you're more awake, you notice others stirring, not to take over but to do their part. Someone stands near the entrance, arms crossed, watching the doorway as if daring the wind itself to try something. Another person, a woman wrapped in heavy fur, gently stirs a pot suspended near the heat. She tastes something with a finger, nods, then adds a bit of crushed dried leaves from a pouch at her belt. Tea, medicine, midnight snack. You're not sure, but clearly, winter doesn't sleep, and neither does a Viking household. There's a phrase they use, roughly translates to wake watch. In the darkest months, the night was broken into natural shifts. Someone always needed to stay alert, not just to guard the fire, but to make sure livestock inside the longhouse didn't wander too far or relieve themselves too liberally, to tend to the sick, to keep the atmosphere safe and steady. You quietly recall something you'd nearly forgotten. Earlier, someone murmured a blessing over the fire just before night fell. It wasn't dramatic, more like an old habit, something about warmth and warding off shadows. Now here in the small hours, that blessing feels like insulation. There's a weird comfort in this choreography, like the house is a living thing, and someone's always keeping its heart beating. You shift again and hear a soft jingling near your head. It's not metal. It's the sound of bone charms, braided into a string that's looped around the nearest post. You hadn't noticed them before. They click together softly, randomly, almost like dice deciding your fate. You finally decide to sit up, just a little. The firelight flickers high enough to make out shapes. A man sharpens a blade slowly, not for battle, just maintenance. A younger girl knits something thick and clumsy. The older fire tender walks the room, checking walls, checking the door latch, checking the animals. Even the goats are asleep, curled like furry boulders near the warmest stones. But the most fascinating part, nobody talks. Not in the way you'd expect. There are no conversations, just quiet murmurs, humming, the occasional wordless song fragment, or a snort of laughter that evaporates as quickly as it appears. This isn't social time, it's preservation time. You realize now, in Viking winter life, nighttime vigilance wasn't optional. It was built into the rhythm of survival. If something went wrong, a fire spreading, a cow giving birth, an ember escaping the hearth, these were events that could make or break a household. So the family, even if large, worked in shifts, not by schedule but by instinct. The old woke when their joints complained. The young took over when sleep ran out. Parents stirred when the baby fussed. Nobody needed a rooster to tell them when. And when a shift changed hands, it was usually with a look, not a word. A nod that said, "Go, I've got it now." It's kind of beautiful, in a quiet, stoic, frostbitten sort of way. You lie back down, warmed by the sense that even if you sleep, you're not unguarded. There's someone watching the flame, someone counting how much firewood is left, someone listening for strange sounds outside, an animal or something worse, someone keeping the space between waking and sleeping from growing too wide. And just before you drift off again, you see the fire tender return to his spot. He pokes the coals once more, then tucks a few embers to the side. A trick, maybe, for morning rekindling. Or maybe just a habit passed down from winters so old they predate even the sagas. Whatever the reason, it works. The house breathes warm again. By the time morning's hint starts seeping in, not sunlight, just a grayer shade of black, you're already awake again. Sort of. You've drifted in and out all night, wrapped in fur, lulled by the crackle of fire and the muffled shuffles of boots and hooves. But now, the quiet hum of doing things has returned. It's not the dramatic clash of swords or the thunder of sails unfurling, just the soft, scraping soundtrack of a Viking winter morning. There's work to do, indoors, always. You sit up and blink against the smoky air. The longhouse isn't cold exactly, but the kind of not warm that makes you hesitant to uncover your feet. Still, people are already moving. Someone's stirring a pot. Someone else is unraveling rope. A small boy is trying and failing to tie a knot that actually holds. You might expect the Vikings to be idle in the winter, what with everything frozen solid outside, but you'd be very wrong. These months weren't downtime. They were the closest thing to studio time a Viking community had. You couldn't plant, you couldn't raid, but you could make things. Right now, you're sitting just a few feet away from a woman patiently rethreading a loom. She's weaving what looks like a heavy cloak, dense, scratchy wool, dyed with the kind of natural pigments that scream, "I used crushed bugs for this." And she probably did. Weaving wasn't just busy work, it was essential. Clothes wore down fast. Cloaks were armor against the wind. Sailcloths needed patching, tunics needed reinforcing, and the stronger the weave, the longer you'd last out there on the icy sea. Nearby, a man's trimming strips of leather. He's making something. Maybe shoes, maybe bindings. His tools are simple but surprisingly refined. An iron awl, a curved blade, a wooden mallet. All of it worn smooth from use. This is winter work, quiet, repetitive, tactile. In one corner, an older woman is chewing dried cod like it's the Viking version of popcorn while hand-whittling bone into a hairpin. She pauses occasionally to look at a younger girl beside her, who's trying to do the same, only less elegantly. The result looks less like a hairpin and more like a small club, but hey, that's how you learn. Over near the fire, someone's boiling something pungent. You get a whiff and almost recoil. It smells like heated vinegar mixed with regret, but it's probably a cleaning solution or maybe a glue. Historians still argue whether certain Viking adhesives were intentional inventions or happy accidents involving fermented fish. Either way, the fumes are very real. It's in these mundane hours that the Viking home shows its quiet genius. These weren't just warriors, they were craftspeople, endlessly adaptive. Long winters meant months of tight confinement, and that meant planning. You help sort bits of scrap cloth into usable lengths. Some will be bandages, others stuffing, others patched into worn cloaks. The household saves everything. If there's a motto to Viking winter, it's waste nothing, complain less. A mother husks grain while bouncing a toddler on her hip. Behind her, someone turns a block of wood into a spoon, again, probably their fourth or fifth this season. Wooden tools wear down, especially with all the communal eating. You're starting to understand why Viking houses had so much spare everything. Because everything breaks when it's degrees C and you use it 10 times a day. Not all work is strictly practical though. Some of it is cultural insulation. One man is carving into a chunk of antler, runes maybe, or animals, possibly both. You lean in, and it's clearly an antler snake thing that's either deeply symbolic or just the medieval version of doodling in class. He catches you looking and gives a shrug like, I'm not even sure what it is yet either. Viking wintercraft wasn't all about utility. There's a deep artistic streak running through these people, and it comes out when the outside world is too dangerous to enter. The indoor months become a kind of quiet festival of making, telling, and repeating the patterns of things already loved. And that includes stories. Halfway through your sock mending attempt, which, let's face it, is going terribly, a voice rises from the hearth. A woman, not the eldest but older than most, clears her throat and starts speaking. Everyone quiets. No introduction, no stage, just story. She tells a saga, not a full one, just a scene. A moment from an old tale about Thor tricking a giant, or maybe the one where Loki turns into a fish and then back into himself, and then ruins everyone's day. It's hard to tell because she mumbles and people laugh at parts you clearly didn't understand. But the fire burns warmer when she speaks. You glance around and even the people working are listening. Their hands never stop, that's part of it, but their heads tilt toward her voice. She isn't reading. There are no scrolls. The stories live inside them, passed from person to person like tools or warm stones or sourdough starters. They get reshaped each time. No one seems to mind. It's more important that the stories keep than that they stay the same. You sit there, trying not to stab yourself with your own needle, surrounded by people who know how to use their hands and their memories and their winters. It's hard work, it's boring work, it's vital work. And unexpectedly, it's comforting. You begin to realize this season isn't something the Vikings simply survived. It's something they used. A time not for expansion but for consolidation, not for conquest but for connection. Here, under this sloping roof, in the soft flicker of firelight and the smell of wet wool and baked barley, you understand something oddly tender. This is how they lasted. Not just through one night, but through generations of nights. By making, by mending, by telling stories that warm even when the fire dies out. You're still holding a half-mended sock, well, more of a woolen surrender flag at this point, when someone taps you gently on the shoulder and whispers, "Your turn." Wait, your turn. You glance around. A man stands near the hearth, stretching and blinking. His eyes are puffy and he looks like he just woke from the kind of deep, drool-on-the-furs sleep that only happens after midnight. He nods again. You catch on. It's a watch rotation. You groan softly, but you're not surprised. In the Viking longhouse, no one sleeps straight through the night. It's not just about keeping the fire burning or scaring off any bears with a death wish. Though yes, that too. It's also because sleep here is not what you're used to. You think of sleep as one big 8-hour block, like downloading rest in one uninterrupted binge. But for these folks, sleep comes in shifts, cycles, and pieces. It's called segmented sleep. And it's not just a Viking quirk. It's actually how humans across many pre-industrial cultures operated. You drag yourself up and shuffle toward the hearth. Someone hands you a warm stone wrapped in cloth, your consolation prize for waking. You press it against your stomach and instantly feel a little less like death. A few others stir as you settle into your post. It's the middle of the night, except in winter, the middle of the night lasts for several forevers. So really, this is just one of many natural waking points. Historians still argue whether this broken-up sleep was by choice or necessity, but the rhythms of fire maintenance, nighttime feeding of bobbies, animals, and occasionally grandpas, and indoor chores suggest it was deeply woven into Viking life. You sleep when you can, wake when you must, and no one thinks it's strange if you're chatting by the fire at 3 a.m. And chat they do. A man on his up shift beside you sharpens a knife with rhythmic strokes, occasionally humming. A couple of women nearby sit cross-legged, whispering gossip while stirring a small pot of some vaguely medicinal sludge. You catch the phrase, his second wife's cousin, and immediately know you're in for a treat. Meanwhile, the kids, they sleep through it all, mostly. One rolls over with a groan and a loud fart, causing 3 people to snort into their cloaks. You smile into the fire. Even in ancient Scandinavia, some things never change. The night carries its own rituals, small ones almost invisible unless you're paying attention. People wake, shift, tuck in children. A grandmother wraps her grandson's feet more tightly in fur. Someone checks on the goats. Yes, still in the house, still chewing something suspicious. This system means that no one is ever completely off duty. Even during sleep, there's a low hum of awareness. You're part of a living system, a breathing house. And just like a heartbeat doesn't stop when you rest, the longhouse never truly falls silent. In this hush, people tend to things they wouldn't during daylight. Fixing a cracked comb, quietly mending a tunic, maybe whispering to the gods, asking for a slightly warmer spring. Some use the dark for intimacy, not just the wink-wink kind, though yes, that too, but for soft conversations that would feel out of place under the eyes of day. One couple exchanges stories of childhood's past. You learn about a storm that knocked down half a village and the chicken that never quite recovered. It's cozy, this odd middle-of-the-night world. Sleep becomes something shared, not hoarded. People drift into slumber like rowboats unmoored from the firelight, then return when their name or duty calls. You lie back eventually, your shift over, and you feel oddly content. Your body isn't demanding another 6 hours, it's just asking for a little while. So you curl up again under your furs, warmed by the fire, the stone still tucked at your belly. And as your eyelids start to fall, you marvel at this rhythm. 2 sleeps, one in the early night, one before dawn. In between, a vigil of sorts, a space where the community breathes together, each heartbeat syncing with the crackle of logs. It's not a broken night, it's a braided one. Just before you drift off, someone else rises. They stretch, yawning, and walk toward the fire, nodding at the half-sleeping cluster you've just left behind. And the house continues. Because out here, on the edge of survival, sleep isn't a solo act. It's a choreography. 1,000 winters have taught these people how to share the night. You wake coughing, not violently, not alarmingly, but just enough to feel it scratching in the back of your throat like a wool sock soaked in smoke. Around you, others are stirring too. One child's nose whistles. Someone mutters and reaches for a water skin. Someone else just groans and rolls over. Yeah, winter sickness is definitely a thing. You sit up slowly, your breath rising visibly in front of you. Even with the fire gently crackling and body heat pooled inside the walls, the cold seeps in through the floor, through the cracks, through your very bones. And that means your immune system is doing its best under pretty hostile conditions. Spoiler, there's no orange juice or antibiotics coming to the rescue. Here in the Longhouse, illness is accepted the same way winter itself is. Inevitable, inconvenient, and usually shrugged at unless someone starts convulsing. A sniffle, meh, everyone has one. A deep cough that rattles like old wagon wheels. Concerning but not surprising. You're living cheek to jowl with 20 other humans plus animals plus a fire that produces more smoke than warmth. Honestly, it's impressive anyone makes it to spring at all. So how do the Vikings deal with sickness in the long dark months? First, herbal remedies. A woman beside the hearth is grinding dried plants in a stone bowl, Angelica root, probably. Maybe yarrow. Both are used for everything from fevers to stomach pain to mysterious spiritual unbalancings. She sprinkles the powder into a warm broth and hands it to a young man lying down with a glazed-over look in his eyes, whether it's real medicine or just a comforting placebo. Historians still argue whether these concoctions had pharmacological impact or psychological reassurance. But in here, where the air feels half fire and half lung humidity, you take whatever you can get. Then there's the breath smoke solution. Someone tosses pine needles or spruce twigs into the fire. It smells sharp, earthy, medicinal. You cough again, but weirdly, your sinuses do feel clearer. It's not quite a spa day, but it's something. In the back corner, a man is bundled up, shivering in layers of fur. Someone sits beside him, rubbing his arms, checking his forehead. Just a chill, they whisper, but everyone's a little more alert now. Chills can spiral. A persistent fever can carry someone off in 2 days. There are no doctors here, not in the modern sense, but every household has someone, usually an older woman, who knows what to do. She mixes up a poultice made from onions and herbs, applies it to the chest, mutters something under her breath. You catch a rune carved into the wooden bowl. Protection, healing, hope. Meanwhile, you're sipping something offered to you in a horn cup. It tastes like burnt mint and pond water. Good for the lungs, they say. You nod politely while trying not to gag. The thing is, these aren't primitive people stumbling around with sticks and prayers. They're practical. They pay attention. When someone gets sick, they notice patterns. What helps? What doesn't? What plants to avoid? What furs are better at keeping fevered bodies warm without suffocating them? They also believe in the unseen stuff, spirits, curses, the evil eye. If someone's illness drags on too long, you can bet someone's checking for a hex, maybe carving runes, maybe burying eggshells under the threshold to trap whatever bad thing is sneaking in at night. You glance up and see a small bundle of twigs and feathers hanging from the rafters. A charm, clearly, maybe to protect children, maybe to ward off coughing demons. No one explains it to you, but you feel better knowing it's there. And then, of course, there's prevention by nutrition, or what passes for nutrition in winter. Remember that fermented shark, it's back. So's the dried fish, the bone marrow, the animal fat scraped lovingly from the inside of sheep heads. These people eat dense, fatty, preserved food, high-calorie survival fuel. It's not glamorous, but it keeps your organs ticking. There's also honey. Not a lot of it, mind you, it's precious. But when someone is really sick, they might be offered honey water, sweet, antibacterial, symbolic too, like offering light in the middle of this long, dark freeze. And what about mental health? You don't have modern terms like seasonal affective disorder or cabin fever, but let's be honest. When it's been dark for 17 hours straight and your bunkmate has sneezed directly into your soup for the 3rd time, your spirit needs tending too. This is where storytelling matters. This is where songs and sagas are medicine. You lie back and listen to someone recount a tale of Thor's most ridiculous blunder, and somehow your headache eases. Someone else sings softly, an old lullaby in Old Norse that loops like a wave. Laughter becomes a balm. Music becomes a salve. Quirky fact: some Viking remedies included applying live frogs to boils or drinking mixtures of burnt mouse and honey for coughs. We're not saying they worked, but hey, desperate times. By the end of the night, you're still a little congested but no longer miserable. You curl up again and let the warmth of the fire do its work. Across the longhouse, another cough echoes, but softer this time. Spring still feels impossibly far away, but the humans in this house, these tired, resourceful, resilient people, they're going to make it. And maybe, just maybe, so are you. You step outside into the night, your breath curling into the vast, frigid darkness like ghostly thread. The cold clamps down immediately, sharp, honest, and absolute. And above you, stars. Not just a few scattered pinpricks either. You're looking at an entire vault of shimmering light, so brilliant it feels unnatural. The kind of night sky that makes you feel dizzy if you stare too long. You've stepped into a planetarium built by the gods themselves. Everything is still. The snow underfoot squeaks as you walk, tight-packed and dry. The crunch of it is satisfying in a way that almost makes the chill worth it. Behind you, the longhouse glows faintly, smoke curling from the roof like a sleepy dragon's sigh. But out here, it's just you and the northern silence. This is the endless night sky of Viking winter. You tug your cloak tighter around you, but you stay out anyway. You're not the only one. Someone else is standing farther off, near the edge of the clearing, staring up too. It's become a ritual of sorts, stepping out, even briefly, just to remind yourself the world is still out there, that the darkness overhead holds more than just clouds and ice. You spot the familiar belt of Orion, although the Norse wouldn't have called it that. To them, those 3 stars might have been part of Frigg's distaff, or even a giant's shoulder. The constellations you recognize today came later, but these stars, these exact points of light, they saw them too. And when you're a Viking enduring winter at the top of the world, you look for more than just shapes. You look for omens. Clusters of stars might foretell success in battle, or the return of a long-lost boat, or the birth of a child who will grow up with a wolf's strength. Some believe the brightest stars are souls, watching, guiding, judging. Above it all dances something else, the aurora borealis, not every night, but tonight, the gods have decided to show off. Green ribbons unfurl like stage curtains pulled across the sky. They shimmer, pulse, ripple silently. No fanfare, no music, just light moving like it's alive. You can almost believe it's sentient, that it's watching you back. To the Norse, the aurora wasn't just pretty. Some believed it was the Bifrost, the rainbow bridge between worlds flickering in the night, flashing with the footfalls of spirits crossing over. Others thought it was the glow of Valkyrie armor, streaking across the sky as they chose which warriors would die tomorrow. Historians still argue whether these beliefs were universally held or varied by region, but one thing for sure, no one looked at these lights and thought, meh. You don't think meh either. You think this is what forever looks like. Your toes start to go numb, but you don't move. The air is biting, yes, but also pure, untouched, and utterly still except for the occasional far-off howl. A dog, a wolf, it doesn't matter. It reminds you that you're not alone, not really. A girl trudges past you with a small bucket. "Snow for the hearth," she mutters. You nod, but neither of you really wants to break the spell. You both look up again for a moment before she heads inside. Even chores can wait a few seconds when the sky decides to do this. And while you're out here, here's a strange tidbit to think about. Some Viking Age people believed that whistling at the aurora could summon it closer, and that if it came too close, it might steal your soul. So you keep your mouth shut, just in case. You take another step forward and the snow sinks deeper beneath your boot. Past the cleared earth, you're walking on a smooth crust of old drifts, now hard-packed and frozen. Your breath whistles softly now, your lips cracked, your eyes watering a little. But still, you stay. Why? Because this sky doesn't just light up the dark. It justifies it. You remember something an old man said earlier by the fire, that every winter is a challenge issued by the gods, and those who survive it are a little more worthy of the spring that follows. You get it now. This moment, the one where you're freezing, slightly uncomfortable, completely alone, and more alive than you've been in days, this is the point. You finally turn back toward the house. The firelight beckons. The muffled sound of someone laughing, low, tired, real, spills out through the animal-hide door. But you pause one last time to glance up. There's one particularly bright star overhead. It pulses just once. You decide to believe it's watching over you. The days have stopped getting shorter now, but the change is almost imperceptible. You wouldn't know it from inside the longhouse, where dark is still the default and morning is more of a guess than a certainty. Still, something subtle is shifting. The air doesn't bite quite as hard. The snow doesn't creak quite as loudly underfoot. The birds, yes, even the birds, have started to return in faint chirps like whispers testing the silence. You're deep into the final weeks of winter, and somehow you've made it this far. Inside, the mood is different. Not lively exactly, but looser. Laughter comes a little easier. Jokes are more absurd. Someone's trying to balance a wooden spoon on their nose. It's not working, but you all cheer anyway. The end is in sight, and even if you still have to slog through more snow and stoke more fires and sleep beside snoring goats, the weight is lighter. Hope is louder than fear now. A woman near the hearth is stitching something that looks suspiciously like a sail. You raise an eyebrow. She smirks. Better to dream ahead, she mutters. She's not wrong. Spring means more than warmth. It means boats back on the water, journeys resumed, and the return of trade, raids, or reunions. You help stack some of the last dried firewood, carefully rationed since mid-January. The pile's getting smaller. No surprise. But what is surprising is how warm the longhouse feels now. Not just from the fire, but from the sheer number of humans, animals, furs, and memories packed into this wooden womb. Earlier in the season, it had all felt claustrophobic. Now it feels earned, like a badge. This isn't just surviving, this is becoming winterproof. Someone calls you over to the wall, one of the carved posts near the fire pit. They're pointing at something you hadn't noticed before, a fresh rune carved crudely into the wood. You trace it with your fingers. It's jagged, probably done with a dull knife. But it's a symbol of protection, or possibly good fortune, depending on how you squint. Historians still argue whether winter runes were widespread or just local superstitions, but no one denies they mattered. When you can't control the world outside, you draw on the inside. You make your mark. Even the animals seem to feel the shift. The goat by the door, your unofficial roommate, isn't as jumpy as she used to be, and the chickens are laying again, albeit sporadically. One of the younger boys finds a tiny speckled egg nestled in straw and holds it up like treasure. "It's a sign," he yells. You believe him. And then there's the dreams. Winter dreams are different. Everyone says so. You've had them too, deep, unsettling, vivid things that leave you groggy for hours. Some people say it's the smoke. Others blame the fermented fish, but deep down you suspect it's the dark itself, seeping into your mind like cold into bones. That'll start to fade soon too. Light is memory's alarm clock. Tonight someone proposes a song, not one of the long, ancient epics, but a silly one, about sheep and bad ale and how cold your butt gets when you sit on a frozen log. It's ridiculous. You're still humming it hours later. Outside, the snow has begun to melt at the edges. Not much, just a thin sliver of wetness along the timber supports. You stare at it like it's a miracle. A drop falls, slow and fat, from the eaves. You resist the urge to cheer. And yet part of you feels something else, a weird nostalgia for this exact moment. You know that soon the longhouse will empty out again. Boats will launch. People will scatter. You'll chase other problems, storms at sea, enemy axes, poor harvests, broken oaths. But tonight, you're warm, you're full, and the cold has taught you something, that sometimes the hardest seasons make the tightest bonds. You press your palms near the fire one last time before pulling your furs tighter and slipping into bed. The straw pokes you like always, but you barely notice. The snow is softening. Spring is listening. And now slowly you drift. You let the fire's soft crackle fade into the distance as your body settles deeper into the makeshift bedding. The air around you is calm, just a whisper of wind through the chinks in the wood. Everything has slowed. Even the goats have stopped fidgeting. Outside, the stars turn quietly overhead, invisible behind cloud but no less present. The cold doesn't bother you now, not really. You've lived through it, slept through it, learned from it. And now you're ready to rest. You breathe in once more, long and slow. You feel the weight of the furs, the comfort of closeness, the hush of a house that has held hundreds of winters before yours. You're just one voice among many, wrapped in a story much older than yourself. Let it hold you. Let your mind drift to the snow-dusted mountains beyond the fjord, to the ships sleeping on frozen shores, to the northern lights dancing in silence far above your dreams. Whatever comes next thaw sun sails, you'll meet it awake and ready. But not yet. Not tonight. Tonight you sleep like a Viking. Warm, tired, and absolutely alive. Sweet dreams.